Great. In that case, welcome everyone. I am so glad that you're here to support authors and readers and of course Grassroots Books. I'm Ashley, the event and social media coordinator at Grassroots in Corvallis in Oregon. And tonight we have our fourth and final event of Romance Literature Month with authors Karelia, Stetz and Alexandria Bellefleur. Romance Literature Month is an event series designed to help us all celebrate love in all its forms throughout February. Historically, romance literature has been a snubbed genre, dismissed from literary circles, though romance novels serve important functions to readers and writers and literary communities. This month is aimed at romance literacy and romance appreciation, celebrating the stories that help us define, explore, and of course, celebrate love. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers tonight. First, we have Karelia Stetz, who writes happily ever afters for women who love women. Whether it's romance or thriller, her characters get the epic wins they deserve and more. She lives her own happily ever after in Oregon with her wife of 20 plus years. Alexandria Bellefleur is an author of swoony contemporary romance, often featuring lovable grumps and the sunshine characters who bring them to their knees. A Pacific Northwesterner at heart, Alexandria has a weakness for good coffee, Pike Place IPA, and voodoo donuts. Her special skills include finding the best pad thai in every city she visits, remembering faces but not names, falling asleep in movie theaters, and keeping cool while reading smutty books in public. She was a 2018 Romance Writers of America Golden Heart finalist. So here's the way that tonight's event will work. Karelia and Alexandria will engage in conversation, and then we'll open up the floor to a Q&A from audience members for the last 15 or 20 minutes of the hour. Please use the Q&A box to indicate if you have a question at any point during the presentation. Afterwards, we'll be using that to run the Q&A portion of the event. I also will be posting the link to buy or pre-order their books in the chat shortly. I highly encourage you to buy them from us. Not only will you be supporting both Corellia and Alexandria as authors, but also Grassroots as a small indie bookstore that's able to bring events like this to you. So, all that being said, let me hand it off.
All right, wonderful. Well, we are going to each do a little reading, 5 to 7 minutes, just to give you a taste of what we do. And I'm going to go first here. So I'm going to read to you from my upcoming called Satisfaction Guaranteed. It's a story about a sexually inexperienced woman who inherits her aunt's sex toy store. And I will just give you the blurb, since the publisher did such a nice job of writing it for me and I didn't have to write it myself, which was lovely. So when it comes to her career, Kate Elgin has it all figured out. Only professional talk has become her default mode. Relationships are non-existent and don't even mention the word orgasm. All work and no play makes Kate a dull human, but when she inherits a sex toy store, Kate is caught between business and a store filled with every imaginable kind of pleasure, including her infuriatingly irresponsible and deliciously sexy new co-owner. So in the scene that I would like to read for you, kind but flaky sex educator Selena Mathis has just finished leading a painting class in which women take Polaroids of their vulva and then paint portraits of them. And sexually inexperienced and generally uptight Kate has found this whole thing terribly embarrassing and somewhat intriguing. And now they're cleaning up after the painting class. And the passage spans 2 chapters, hence the shift in point of view in the middle. Will you paint me something? Kate asked. Selena looked at the box of student grade paint, basically pigment and glue. It called to her with a force that made her heart ache. And suddenly Selena was sick of being the painter who gave it up, the failed artist who everyone tiptoed around because she was so broken, the woman who gave it all up for an ex she didn't even want to see on caller ID. I'll paint you something if you paint your vulva, Selena said. Fine. Kate sat down like a dutiful student at her work. Selena slowly opened a jar of brown paint. She applied the first layer, just a backdrop to hold Kate's image. She blurred an edge of black with the side of her hand, then dipped her finger in the white and smoothed it into the dark. It felt like touching a woman, wet and delicate. Across from her, Kate kept her eyes on her painting, on her paper, and Selena studied her. The way she sat up straight, even when she was looking down, the edge of her blonde hair sweeping her cheek, but never falling in her eyes. After a few minutes, Kate said, "I'm done, but show me yours first." "It doesn't look like anything," Selena said. Cade walked over to Selena's table. "We are drinking wine out of solo cups in a sex toy store. I don't expect you to paint a masterpiece." Cade stopped. "That's me. It's really me. You said you dropped out of art school. You said you just did a few paintings." Selena bit her lip. "I guess I did a few more than a few." "Now, show me yours." Kate held up her painting. It looked like a daisy with a ring of dots around it. "I love it," Selena said. "And I think we need to talk about anatomy." Chapter 21. Kate could tell Selena was trying to keep a straight face, and she was too. "Every vulva is different." Selena held Kate's painting across her palms. "But this is more different than most." "It's not my vulva," Kate admitted. "It's a mandala." "Different sizes, shapes, colors, that's normal. But I see here you've put in," Selena counted the dots, 18 clitorises. "Mandala," Kate said. "That's a nice word for it," Selena said. "It's part of a very serious spiritual practice," Kate said. Selena dipped her chin and looked up at Kate with the eye. "It's definitely part of my spiritual practice," she said. Kate pretended to grab for her painting. Selena brushed her hand away, fingers grazing the back of Kate's hand. It should have been nothing. Kate shouldn't have even noticed. Kate had ridden in the subway with every single part of her body pressed against a stranger, and she hadn't noticed. But Selena's feather-light touch made her head swim. "I don't want you to feel self-conscious about your 18 clitorises," Selena's eyes twinkled with humor, "but just in case, maybe you got the anatomy wrong. Would you like to take a Polaroid, just to be sure?" "If God meant you to look," Kate said, "he would have put it somewhere obvious." Selena pressed her hands to her chest. "How can you work here and say that? If God hadn't wanted us to look, he wouldn't have invented the cell phone camera." "You didn't study theology, did you?" Kate said. "I've been to church." "Recite some Bible verses," Kate said. Selena rattled off a few. "You know, I think it's cool," Kate said, seriously, "that you can do that." "We all got religion in my hometown," Selena said. "Everyone in Cortland thinks it's weird." "It's cool," Kate said. "You want me to take a Polaroid of my vulva? You can do a portrait in 10 minutes. It's better than stuff people spend years on. You've memorized the Bible. You are who you are. You're real." Selena looked down. "Well, shucks," she said with a country twang. Silence welled up between them, full of the things they weren't saying. But finally, Selena pulled out her phone and said, "If you're not going to take a Polaroid, do you want to see mine?" Kate opened her mouth and closed it again. Selena was holding a cell phone selfie of her own vulva. She was offering it to Kate. The 6 times Kate had had sex, what a sad number. She hadn't thought about what her lover's vulvas looked like. They were just mysterious places where she was going to do something wrong. "She's beautiful and no one's seen her for a long time," Selena said. Was there an etiquette for looking at vulvas? Should Kate say, "Sure," like an invitation to look at a nice picture someone had just posted on Instagram, or no, you don't have to," like when an acquaintance offered to pay for dinner? She should pretend to look, but not really look. That was polite, but modest. Kate nodded. Selena handed her the phone. Of course Kate looked. Selena's body was a deep, dusty rose pink, asymmetrical, her clitoris hidden in the folds of her labia, all but looking a little squished and dry, like Selena had been wearing tight jeans. Cade stared for far, far too long. She has that effect on people, Selena said. Pretty, right? A kind of longing Kate had never felt before washed over her. Her whole soul wanted to unfurl Selena's labia with her tongue. She wanted to touch Selena. She wanted to be touched. She had never wanted anything the way she wanted Selena. And there was only one thing to say. How on earth do you still have a flip phone? Thank you.
All right, that was great. So, Written in the Stars is my debut novel, and it came out in November. I'm going to just follow suit and read the blurb. After a disastrous blind date, Darcy Lowell is desperate to stop her well-meaning brother from playing matchmaker ever again. Love and the inevitable heartbreak is the last thing she wants. So she fibs and says her last setup was a success. Darcy doesn't expect her lie to bite her in the ass. Elle Jones, one of the astrologers behind the popular Twitter account, Oh My Stars, dreams of finding her soulmate. But she knows it is most assuredly not Darcy, a no-nonsense stick in the mud who is way too analytical, punctual, and skeptical for someone like Elle. When Darcy's brother and Elle's new business partner expresses how happy he is that she and Darcy hit it off, Elle is baffled. Was Darcy on the same date? Because awkward. Darcy begs Elle to play along, and she reluctantly agrees to pretend they're dating, but with a few conditions. Darcy must help Elle navigate her own overbearing family during the holidays, and their arrangement expires on New Year's Eve. The last thing they expect is to develop real feelings during a faux relationship. But maybe opposites can attract when true love is written in the stars. So the excerpt that I will be sharing follows their disastrous blind date. And Darcy has just told her brother, Brendan, that the date went well in order to get him off her back. And Brendan has blabbed to Elle that the date went well, and he's so happy about it. And Elle is very, very, very confused. So she decides to confront Darcy and try to figure out what went wrong between them. Leaving her shoes smack dab in the center of the foyer, Elle traipsed farther into Darcy's apartment, brazenly surveying her surroundings. She studied the art on the wall with a curious tilt of her chin before moving on to finger the spines of the books on Darcy's shelf. Every so often, her whole face scrunched, occasionally accompanied by a stuck-out tongue that was not adorable. Hanging back, Darcy swallowed down a lump of discomfort growing in her throat. Elle was a bright splash of color against a clean canvas of Darcy's apartment. Cobalt sweater, bleach-splattered jeans, and mismatched socks, one neon green and the other a soft periwinkle with a pink chevron at the toe and a hole near the ankle. Darcy tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. By all means, make yourself at home. Elle spun on her wholly socked-covered heel and narrowed her eyes. Don't mind if I do, she said, before taking a seat and drawing up both knees to her chest, feet on Darcy's pristine sofa. Darcy stayed standing, arms crossed and chin raised. Nice place. Elle's eyes roved around the room, lingering on the neat stack of Darcy's FSA study guides, before darting over to the fern, Darcy's singular pop of color, in the corner. Her brows furrowed. Did you just move in? Darcy curled her tongue behind her teeth. No. Huh. The fact that she was able to pack so much judgment into such a tiny word would have been impressive had Darcy not been, one, slightly offended, and two, ready to get this conversation over with. You have questions. Darcy didn't bother asking. For all that Elle had sprawled herself lazily across Darcy's sectional in an illusion of relaxation, her fingers twitched against her thighs, her feet shifting, toes curling and uncurling, as her gaze bounced from one surface to another. Elle wrapped her arms around her shins. We're through with the small talk? In the interest of time, Darcy dipped her chin. Like I said, I'm busy. Elle's too perceptive gaze darted from the lone, now cold cup of coffee to Darcy, her eyes lingering on Darcy's lounge pants, then her hastily braided hair. Right. Then in the interest of time, I'll get straight to it. Elle lifted her hips, wiggling her phone free from her back pocket. She made several swipes against the screen before clearing her throat. Question 1. What the fuck? Darcy shut her eyes and breathed deep for a count of 4, held it for a count of 7, and exhaled for a count of 8. She'd have repeated the process had Elle's stare not been palpable, making the between her shoulder blades itch. Can I expect question 2 to be more specific? Elle harumphed and glanced down at the phone in her hand. I don't know, let's see. Question 2, how dare you? Darcy abandoned her yoga breathing and cut to the chase. I'm sorry, okay? Best to issue a broad stroke apology because Darcy wasn't entirely sure what Brendan had said, only that Elle's reaction wasn't positive. Elle's hand flopped down against the couch, her phone bouncing gently. You're sorry. Sorry for what exactly? For whatever has you all. She waved her hand in Elle's general direction. Vexed. Elle's shoulders shook with slow building laughter. She leaned forward and dropped her head into her hands before letting out an aggrieved, muffled shriek. Vexed. She lifted her head, face flushed pink. God, do you insert that stick up your ass every morning, or is it more like an IUD that lasts you 5 years? Her jaw dropped. You know what? No. Elle stood and sidestepped the coffee table, stalking toward Darcy. I'm not finished. You want to know what has me all vexed? Let's see, maybe you're sorry for being rude last night, poo-pooing what matters to me like my job, ordering a $56 glass of wine, talking smack about me to whoever the hell it was on the phone when you don't know me. Elle took another step forward, fingers lifted as she aired her grievances. Or maybe lying to your brother, huh? Telling him we hit it off when we obviously didn't? You put me in the position of having to choose between going along with your lie, a lie I can't for the life of me understand, or owning up to last night's disaster all on my own. So I don't know. Take your pick, Darcy. Heat flooded Darcy's veins, creeping up her chest and neck, shame making her dizzy. Contradictory and ill-timed, a tendril of heat spread lower, settling beneath Darcy's belly button because anger turned the blue of Elle's irises into something fierce, like a sea during a storm. Color settled high on her cheeks and her messy bun had come undone, spans of hair framing her heart-shaped face. For a moment, Darcy wondered what Elle would look like, sweat dripping down the bare expanse of her neck, her back bowing against Darcy's sheets. The temperature in Darcy's apartment climbed, her shirt sticking to the sweat dotting the small of her back. I'm sorry. Darcy met Elle's glare, the ferocity of which was softened by a glossy dampness that replaced her urge to see Elle tangled up in sheets with the desire to wrap her up in something soft, a blanket, or Darcy's favorite duvet. How utterly bizarre. Darcy cleared her throat. I didn't mean... It wasn't my intention to be rude or to upset her. Elle sniffed loudly and crossed her arms, gaze sharpening once more. Yeah, well, you were, so... Her voice trailed off, an unspoken question. Why? This was the part Darcy had been dreading down to her bones. Explaining herself, her behavior on the date, why she'd led Brendan to believe she had any intention of seeing Elle again. Part of Darcy was tempted not to bother. Wasn't an apology a sincere one enough? Except if Darcy had any hope of salvaging her plan to get Brendan off her back, she'd have to share with Elle. Without an explanation, Elle had no reason not to go directly to Brendan and blab, or at the very least, inadvertently contradict the carefully crafted picture Darcy had painted.
All right, so we have, Alexandria and I have some questions for each other. And since I got to read first, I think you should get to answer the first question. How does that sound? Written in the Stars is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. And there are a lot of nods to Pride and Prejudice in it, of course, part of why I love it. Is there one place or aspect that's your favorite echo to Pride and Prejudice that you feel is really satisfying or elegant, or just that lovely connection between those two stories for you?
You know, it's a Pride and Prejudice retelling, but it's not really a retelling in terms of plot, more so in terms of character archetypes. And, you know, I do have nods sprinkled throughout. I think my favorite tie between Written in the Stars and the source material is something that I haven't noticed anybody catch, and it's actually the relationship between Elle and her mom. I drew heavily from the relationship between Elizabeth Bennet and Mrs. Bennet. and kind of tried to replicate that in a very modern way between Elle and her mother. Elle's mother in Written in Stars is very misguided in how she goes about expressing her care and her concern for her children, and kind of imposing her own fears and hopes for them without taking into consideration what they really want. And, you know, I didn't think it really made sense to have, you know, someone's mother trying to marry them off when they're 27 and they're not from a culture where that is the norm. So I wanted to kind of bring it into more of like a career fear. You know, Elle is an astrologer, and that's definitely not a normal profession. And her mom doesn't understand the career stability in that. And so that was my favorite little tie-in that I haven't seen anybody catch. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess ask you my first question for you. Okay. So did you do any interesting research while writing Satisfaction Guaranteed or for any of your books?
Is Corellia frozen?
She might be. It looks like it.
Oh dear. Oh, she's gone.
Oh, maybe she's back.
Welcome back. You're muted.
Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi is not behaving, and now I have logged in twice. So I'm going to remove one of myself, hopefully. Yes, only removed one. And if that happens again, I'm going to switch to my phone where I've got everything queued up. And I'm so sorry I missed the last of your answer, but I loved what you were saying about the mother. I hadn't thought about that, but now that you say it, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. She's so concerned, but she expresses it in all these unsympathetic ways that don't show empathy for what her daughter really wants. So really, really good. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm excited to ask you this question. Okay, so did you do any interesting research while writing Satisfaction Guaranteed or for any of your other books?
So my theory about is that I can't about something unless I've smelled it, because smell is such an intimate sense, and you can't get it from book research or videos. So the most interesting things I have smelled were for my second romance, For Good, which is about a paroled felon and a district attorney who fall in love in a small conservative town in Eastern Oregon. And for that one, I got to smell a medium and also a maximum security prison. And the medium security prison here in Salem smells, the entire thing smells like dryer sheets, because the incarcerated people do laundry for all sorts of facilities, state facilities. So that was really interesting. And then for Satisfaction Guaranteed, luckily the sex toys I visited did not have particularly noticeable smells. I don't think you want a strong smell out of your sex toy store. But I did go to several classes, not Paint Your Vulva like the one I read, but similar to the other classes that the character Selena teaches. By a couple different teachers, but one was Jessie Fresh. She's out of Portland, a wonderful sex and relationship counselor and educator. And one of the things that I loved about her classes, they were face-to-face, they were in person, they were at Shebop sex toy store. And so we all filed in, and it's a little, although I'm not easily embarrassed, it is still a little awkward to be sitting in a very tightly packed room listening to a sex lecture. But the thing that I loved about Jessie's classes, in addition to the amazing content and her very open and affirming personality, was that she had worksheets. And if you didn't bring your own pen, she had a pencil for you. And when she got to the point in the worksheet where she was going to give you the answer, she would say, now this might be answer number 12 on your worksheet. And that so reminded me of teaching that I've done I just loved it, and I just loved it because that kind of education shouldn't be weird. It shouldn't be dirty. It should be normal. And what makes a class feel normal, like having the teacher tell you that this is blank number 12 on your worksheet, and if you forgot your pencil, she has brought one for you. So that was another really fun research experience for me.
I love that about the smells, because smells trigger, sense memory so much. That's something I always think about. So I hadn't thought about that with book research, though. I love that.
It really brings you in, yeah, and the memory of a smell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since I have talked about sex already, my next question for you, you're mentioned in a Bustle article called "These Books Are So Sexy, They're Almost Erotica." How do you feel about being included in that article? And then another thing that I noticed when reading Alexandria's book is that she's got a great sex scene. Like, she's not afraid of writing sex. But I wouldn't say that this is a book that I think of as written in the stars as being like sex heavy. So I thought that was really interesting, and wondered what you thought about the Bustle article and all that in general.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw the article, I was immediately thrilled. I think Alexis Daria and Talia Hibbert and so many authors that I admire were also on the list. But to call Written in the Stars and the majority of the books mentioned, to call them erotic is really a huge misnomer, because you've got erotica as a separate genre, and then you have erotic romance as a very separate subgenre of romance with its own conventions and kind of rules to play by. So with erotic romance, the sexual journey is integral to the character's journey, whereas then you can just have like high heat contemporary. So lines can blur, but my book is definitely not erotica, nor is it erotic. I think that there's been a greater trend in trade paperbacks pubbed by traditional publishers to be a little lower on the heat. So I think if you have almost any open door on page sex, even well-meaning journalists are going to grab that and say, oh, it's erotic, it's sexy, and it's kind of ignoring the rules that we as authors kind of understand a little bit better. But it's flattering being listed, but I think that it was definitely a big misnomer, because my book's not erotic.
Good answer. Good answer. Yeah. What we understand about the genre is often more complex than what folks outside the genre see and think about.
Yeah, I mean, even if you get asked, like, what's the steam level? It's so subjective also, what people consider steamy. So there's a lot at play in that. Okay, and then, so you said that one of your goals in writing Satisfaction Guaranteed was to spread cliteracy. What is that, and why does it matter? I'm curious.
So cliteracy is a term, it was either coined by or popularized by the artist Sophia Wallace, who does a lot of art around the female body, particularly sexual anatomy. And it just means understanding the clitoris, female sexual anatomy, sexual experience. And I got interested in this when the first moment, I think, was when I was talking to a acquaintance friend, and she mentioned that when she had given birth, she had torn her clitoris. And I thought, that is the strangest thing, because you have to get really exact to tear something that small. That's like tearing a pea. But it did not seem like the appropriate time to ask her. It was sort of a traumatic birth, and I didn't want to be like, ooh, tell me more, that sounds gruesome. But it was in the back of my mind, like, how could you do that? How could you tear your clitoris? And by, I'm not sure quite what research led me to learn that the clitoris is actually this shape and about this size. It's just that most of it is inside. So unfortunately, one can see how you could tear that. The thing that really shocked me was that I was, I don't know, in my late 30s when I learned that. And I was like, I have been a lesbian since birth. Like, I came out of the womb woman-loving woman, and I had prided myself on writing sex scenes that were accurate and realistic, and I think they are, but even I didn't know this. And so then I thought, wait a second, if I don't know this, then who else doesn't know? And turns out lots of people. And this has led researchers, this lack of understanding of the clitoris has led to what researchers call the pleasure gap, which lots of different studies have been done, and they vary a little bit, 69%, 68%, that's the statistics, but basically women who have sex with men reach orgasm at a much lower rate than the men they're partnered with. 95% of men in one reputable study say they reach orgasm almost all the time when they have sex. For women, the number is 64. With hookup sex, it's like 56 for men, 4% for women have orgasm when they have sex with a male partner. The rate of orgasm for women goes up by about 33% when they have sex with other women, bringing them almost on par to the rate of orgasm of men. So with all that put together, I thought, who better to gently and in a non-accusatory, non-threatening way, teach people about the clitoris and female sexuality than a woman-loving woman romance writer who's not too shy about having sex scenes. So that has become a real passion of mine, including, and if you have a hookup, let me know, collecting all the clitoris things I can get. I've got the necklace, I've got the clitoris printed dress. When I first looked for a clitoris model on Amazon, they actually didn't have one. So I had to ask a friend of a friend who works in a factory around here if he could 3D print one for me. He made me one. There's a French doctor who puts the 3D recipe online for you. And my latest project is to make chocolate clitorises. So I have made a clay mold, and then I'm going to cast it in silicone, and then I'm going to make a chocolate mold. So that's my goal in life.
I love that. That is a great goal. I would like to put an order in for a chocolate one when you make them.
You absolutely get a chocolate one. You send me your address and I will send you a beautiful little box of chocolate.
I look forward
to it. So let's see here. I get to ask you another question. Written in the stars, Elle is an astrologist. What sign are you, and what is your personal relationship to astrology?
Like Elle, I'm a Pisces, and if anybody watching wants to know more, I'm a Taurus rising and a Cancer moon. Before I wrote Written in the Stars, well, I guess I should start with where I got the inspiration to write an astrologer. I was trying to think of two absolutely opposite professions, and I came up with an astrologer and an actuary, somebody who goes to spreadsheets and somebody who goes to the stars. And so from that point, I had to do a lot of research to figure out what an astrologer does beyond just writing the horoscopes that you read in Cosmo or whatever, because I was very just kind of like a casual reader of horoscopes, and there's a lot that goes into it. I learned a whole lot, everything about charting, natal charts, Saturn returns, the houses and what it all means, and I put a very, very small fraction of what I learned in the book, and then I did some research on the different apps. I know on Twitter, Astro Poets, they kind of went viral for turning astrology and poetry into tweetable content. And then there's CoStar, the app, and Sanctuary World. and all these apps are, evolving. So I kind of did a very deep dive, and now I'm a little bit obsessed. I'm not quite L level obsessed, but I definitely see the merit in it in terms of introspection and learning more about yourself, and kind of using that as a tool to describe yourself. I don't, put all my stock in trade in it by any means.
That's super cool. After we talked the other day, I went to look myself up again. I'm an Aries, and I always felt like that absolutely did not fit me. And then the first hit on Google, which of course, is always true, was the description of the personality was so true. I was like, wait a second, I never thought I was an Aries, like in spirit. And I looked at this, I'm like, if you define it that way, that's me. Totally. Very cool.
Wild and fall down the rabbit hole. Okay, so another question for you. Okay, so what is one thing you struggle with as a writer?
So I think for me, all of writing is wonderful and all of it is hard. And somehow it never really gets easier, no matter how many books I've written. But one thing that's hard for me, which is maybe a little unusual, is that I am face blind. It's a disorder called prosopagnosia. And so basically, most people look about the same to me. It's like if you had a bowl of apples and someone picked one apple out and they said, this is Tanya. And then they mixed all the apples up again and they said, oh, which one is Tanya? That's kind of like me in faces. So if you gave me 10 young, pretty white women with blonde hair, I couldn't tell you which one was Tanya. Or if a friend shaved their beard and put on a hat, it'd be like 50-50 on whether or not I knew them. Like, that looks kind of like so-and-so. So describing people's faces is really hard for me. With my last book, Worth the Wait, my editor was reading and she said, I have no idea what these people look like. And I'm like, yeah, that makes two of us. So it's always a bit of a guess, reading what other writers say about their characters' faces and then kind of borrowing a little bit here and a little bit there and trying to put something together that has like high cheekbones. Yes, got it. But that's hard. I don't see their faces because I don't really see real people's faces in the way that other people do.
Yeah, I could see that being a struggle, but it's also interesting because I know so many people who like to kind of self-insert their own description of what they want a character to look like. So sometimes I feel like even going vague with what a character looks like can actually be in your best interest. So
I hope so. I've definitely read those books where I had a picture of the character, not really their face per se, but something along the lines, later in the book contradicted what I was thinking. I'm like, oh no, I thought they had like black hair down to here. I didn't realize, whatever. So hopefully I fake it well enough. So my next question for you is, what made you fall in love with Seattle? Your book, the whole series is set in Seattle, is that right?
Yes, yeah, it is. I moved to Seattle when I was in middle school, and I immediately fell in love with the city. I moved from a very small town in North Georgia, and so moving to Seattle, this vibrant city, was definitely a departure from what I knew. And what I like to kind of replicate about what I love in Seattle and put it into my books is less about specific places or how often it rains, because I know that some people are like, there's hardly any rain in your book, but when you're from Seattle, you stop realizing that it rains. What I wanted to kind of insert was more of this vibe and this vibrancy of the city, and the city feels alive to me. I spent a lot of time in Capitol Hill, and it kind of became a character while I was living there. And so in my books, I like to kind of make the city a character, very Seattle-y vibes and kind of quirkiness and the diversity, how you can turn one corner and end up in a completely different district that feels very different. Always like home. So that was what made me fall in love with Seattle and what I like to replicate in my book. I hope my goal is to make other people fall in love with Seattle when they read my books.
I can definitely see that. It's a love story between the characters, but it's also kind of a love story for Seattle in a really nice way. And being a Pacific Northwesterner, I did not notice the lack of rain. I'm like, yeah, you know, it's just, yeah, you don't notice it. You barbecue, we barbecue in the rain. It's okay.
Exactly. I mean, you don't carry an umbrella. No. It's like never, I wouldn't dream of it. So to have some people who weren't from Seattle be like, I thought it rained all the time. And I'm like, oh, it actually rains more in Miami. Trust me. Like, so that is lovely. Yeah, I think you absolutely captured Seattle. I love Seattle. And I felt it. That was a really fun part of the book for me. Oh. Okay, so my next question for you. Okay, so you have a lot of sexual content in your books. How shy do you feel about putting that kind of content out into the world?
I used to be super shy about everything. So I'm very proud of myself that I have moved through that. I have overcome my shyness, and I really feel pretty calm and confident about that content. I would never say bring it up to my students. If they ask what I write, they asked what my book was about. I said it was about someone who inherited a business. We didn't have to talk about what kind of business. When I did the Mystery Box storytelling show, which is like The Moth, but about sex, I didn't tell anyone in my professional circle. One of my friends was like, you should have told me, I would totally have gone. I'm like, yeah, I know you would have. But she was a new colleague. We were just getting to know each other. So I was like, I'm not going to share that in my professional context. But other than that, I love it. I don't think sex is embarrassing. And I like being that person who can talk about it without, I would still blush all the time, but without feeling any shame or embarrassment on the inside. So I'm pretty proud of that.
I understand the blushing. I've gotten better at, talking about it, but I still can't control this reaction.
I wish I could. I can't. I'm so pale. It's just everything. Look at me and I blush. Let's see here. So, what is one thing you've learned from writing Written in the Stars, or the sequel, or the one you're working on now, or becoming a full-time writer, which is awesome?
I feel like I learned something new with every book, which kind of sounds vague, but with Written in the Stars, I think the number one thing I learned was I had this idea of these characters, their chemistry, and I feel like I did a great job of that in the very beginning, and then in my revision I had to kind of build it in the middle, because in my head I was like, these characters are meant to be together, but you have to show that to the reader that they're meant to be together. And so in an earlier draft I didn't have, I'm trying to think of some scenes, there are several scenes where they go thrift shopping, and then there's a scene with a Christmas tree, and I didn't have that in the first draft, just because I felt like, the chemistry was there for me, but having to kind of, make sure the reader sees that. That was something I learned in book one. With Hang the Moon, I kind of describe my writing as like all vibes, no plot. I don't like to put my characters through too much heartbreak. So I've kind of learned that you really do have to push their wounds, and you have to torture your characters a little bit to get the payout. So that's what I've learned with those two. In terms of just transitioning to writing full time, it's been time management, because, we spoke on the phone yesterday a little about this, but when you're not writing full time, I feel like, you're squeezing in your writing time, like, after work or in the morning. And I had days squeezing in writing where I could put out like 6,000 words, and I was so proud of myself. And now writing full time, I'm sitting in front of my computer all day, and I look at my word count and I'm like, wow, I wrote like 1,500 words. What happened? And it's not even just the distraction, but I feel like it's also the external pressure once you have a book out in the world and know that people are going to read it. I feel like I become even more critical, and I can't turn my inner editor off while I'm drafting. So that's been something I've learned, and just, you know, just kind of enjoy the journey and the hiccups and just kind of ride the waves.
That's cool. That's cool. I definitely sympathize with that sense of pressure from knowing that someone's going to read your thing, and I don't know, so different from writing before you get an agent or a publisher, or just, you know, in that early stage. I teach creative writing, and I always tell people to enjoy that time before you're published, before you have a contract, because there's a freedom in it. But of course, when I was there, I hated it, and I'm like, when am I going to make it?
The grass is it's always green.
What's that?
The grass is just greener no matter, you know, what side you're on.
Always, always. I have, let's see here, it looks like we have 12 minutes left. Ashley, do you want us to keep going, or do you want to pause for a Q&A of some sort?
Q&A would be good at this point, if you're both ready to transition.
Sure.
All right, we already have one question in the chat. And of course, to those of you who are listening still, please ask more questions. I'm sure you have them. We have time. And the question I'm seeing in the chat right now is from Remisia. Might be mispronouncing that name a little bit.
That's my friend who I did not tell about the sex storytelling show, because we were new friends, and I was like, oh no. So anyways, cool. Thank you, Remisia. What's your question?
The question I'm seeing here is, how did you come up with the name of your book, Satisfaction Guaranteed?
My publisher came up with it, which is so nice. I think I might have given them a few suggestions, but they choose the titles, which is a wonderful weight off my shoulder.
I know it's traditional.
Nice weight. That's a nice weight. I had to pick all my titles, so I kind of wish I didn't have that pressure.
Yes, I love having them. They pick the titles, they write the back cover blurb. That is so nice. I remember when I moved to this publisher and no longer had to write my own back cover blurb, I was like, you're going to do it for me just like that? Like, and you're so good at it. So that was.
I have a follow-up question to this for both of you, actually. And in past events of this series, we've had authors sort of discuss their journey into publishing. We have Beverly Jenkins, who discussed being one of the earliest Black romance authors with her own line of historical romance. For both of you, what has been your experience getting published? What has that been like?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. My journey to publication, I actually came into it from writing fan fiction. That was my writing background before I started writing my original work. I entered Pitch Wars, which is a like an online mentorship program where you kind of apply and might get selected by a mentor who published author, and you to polish a manuscript that you will then go and query. And I got my agent from that manuscript, and then that manuscript did not sell on submission. So I wrote another manuscript and was polishing it when I came up with the idea for Written in the Stars. And I put together I sold it on proposal. So I put together a synopsis in 3 chapters, and we went on submission with that, and it sold. So it was several years though from the time I decided to seriously pursue publication to, signing my contract with Avon. So yeah, it wasn't a straight line. It was definitely lots of hills and bumps.
Follow-up question for you, since I think Corellia is frozen again. Hopefully she'll come back. In your experience, has writing fan fiction shaped how you think about romance novels, or do you think it's given you a slightly different perspective, or is it sort of all the same to you?
I would say that when you're writing fan fiction, you're working with established characters and an audience that understands like the base personalities of characters. So transitioning to original work, having to build characters from scratch was something new for me, but it was something I really enjoyed because I like starting with character before I even transition to plot. That was definitely new. But I think what another takeaway from writing fanfic was kind of the strong desire for a lot of people to read romance, but maybe they haven't been exposed to the genre. And so I've tried to bring my friends in who haven't actually read genre romance because they had misconceptions about it. But fan fiction, a lot of it, unless it's like general fic, is romance. It's shipping characters. So there's similarities and differences, but yeah, it's been a fun transition. I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. There we go. I feel like there are more and more stories of authors who start out as fanfic authors and then sort of transition. It seems like a very natural transition to make, so that's really interesting. Karelia is still missing. I hope she makes it back. I'm seeing a question in the Q&A here from Valerie, who's asking, was there a line you wrote in your book that you were shocked you came up with? Ooh.
A line that I came up with. I mean, I have the book here. I don't want to like waste anyone's time flipping through it. In the excerpt that I read, I was very proud of the line where Elle asks Darcy if she inserts the stick up her ass every morning, or if it's like an IUD that lasts for 5 years. That one came to me out of nowhere. Another line that was actually a tie-in to Pride and Prejudice. Darcy is speaking with her brother Brendan, and she makes a comment about how he doesn't need to be trying to like marry her off like a Regency spinster in one of his favorite Jane Austen novels. So that was a little like a meta nod to Pride and Prejudice in there. That one just came to me and surprised me in how perfectly it kind of fit the scene. I had a lot of fun with the secondary character, Margot. I have a line later in the book where she's discussing the pitfalls of dating apps and trying to tell people that she is pansexual and people not knowing what pansexual means. And so I wrote a line about her frustration at somebody thinking that she's attracted to nonstick cookware because that's something I've really heard. And I was proud of finding a place for that. So yeah, little lines can be unexpected and come to you for sure.
Those are fun. I feel like romance authors are so well known for coming up with really witty dialogue. Do you ever feel that pressure, or is it sort of just fun for you to?
I do. When I was writing Written in the Stars, I felt like all these lines came to me, and then I'm working on Deadline, and I definitely, I feel like you can't force comedy. Comedy just has to like come to you. So having that added pressure of Deadline can definitely make it a little harder to come up with the funny bits.
Welcome back, Corellia.
Sorry about my internet, and I tried to do it on my phone, but on my phone it says I have been removed by host. So technology, my apologies.
Oh, we're glad you made it back. I have one more question for both of you I want to ask as we start nearing the end of this meeting. And I have to ask, besides your own books or each other's books, what's on your essential reading list for romance enthusiasts or even romance amateurs, let's say?
Oh, that's a great question. I mentioned earlier, I think before we started the meeting, that I'm a big fan of Anna Burke, who is one of my former students. So it is exhilarating and a little intimidating to have a student become that good. I remember reading her first and I read it and I said, how much of the manuscript is done? Can I read it? And it was not as in teacher, can I read it? It was like, I want to read it because I need to know what happens. And that never happens. I mean, I love my students. I love working with them. I love coaching them in their writing. But I don't go around reading student manuscripts for fun. And hers I did. So Anna Burke is definitely on my list, and I am in the middle of Abby Jimenez's book, The Happily Ever After Playlist. That's super fun. And then Casey McQuiston's Red, White, and Royal Blue. I think that book is so amazing for being just like flat out funny. But as an English professor, like, it's really well written. Like it's not, I suspect that it doesn't get the kind of non-romance attention that it deserves, because, you know, oh, it's romance, it's just fluff, it's just for fun. You know, that's the misconception about romance, but it's really well written. So that's definitely a big favorite of mine. How about you?
It's so tough because I feel like to give like an essential guide, you know, there's so many subgenres and people's tastes vary and it's so subjective. But for me, I always recommend Talia Hibbert. I feel like if you're not reading Talia Hibbert, you're missing out. I love her Brown Sisters series, and I'm so looking forward to Act Your Age, Eve Brown, which comes out, I think, next month. And I also always recommend Alyssa Cole. She, you know, kind of transcends several subgenres of romance. And she also has her thriller that came out last year as well. I think she has, I just blanked on the title. She actually has an FF romance coming out on May 25th, I believe. And all of her Reluctant Royals series and her Runaway Royal series, I highly, highly recommend. They're so fun, and her writing is amazing and funny. So those would be my two recommendations.
Thank you for the recommendations. I posted links in the chat as quickly as I could. I might have missed a couple. I guess because we're really bumping up right against the end of this event tonight, do either of you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before I wrap up?
I would just tell everyone to buy some books from Grassroots. Of course, we want you to buy ours, but buy some. Buy a guide to mushroom picking. Grassroots, like I said before, is the bookstore of my childhood when I was a teenager. My dream was to see my book at Grassroots, and I want to see my book at Grassroots when I'm 90. So whoever you are, whatever you're interested in, like, buy some books from Grassroots tonight. Don't put it off.
Seconded.
Thank you for the support there. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This was such a fun conversation to be a part of. And Corellia and Alexandria, I truly appreciate your time and your willingness to share your insight with us. To our audience members, support these authors by buying their books, preferably here with us. Your support does help small bookstores like us stay open and bring authors to our community like this. This was our final event of Romance Literature Month, and I am extra grateful to all of you and our authors and our patrons for helping us put on this month-long series. Indie bookstores have had a long history of sort of passing over romantic fiction, and I hope that that changes, and this is the first step to doing that. So on that note, thank you so much again, everyone, and we hope to see you back for more events soon. Have a good rest of your night.